So I spend a lot of time with indigenous people. I first started working with them. I was sent into the Amazon as a Peace Corps volunteer in 1968. And I've been spending time with indigenous people ever since on all parts of the world. I've worked with indigenous people on every continent where they exist. And that doesn't include Antarctica because there aren't any there. But every single indigenous culture that I know of has prophecies that this is a time with the potential for tremendous change. This is the time. We are approaching this time, and it's all about we having to make the change happen. Not long ago, I was with the Quechua people in the high Andes. I was leading a group of people from the United States, and one of the people in our group asked this Quechua woman shaman, "What do we have to do to save the earth?" And I was translating. The woman shaman laughed and she said, "Save the earth? Mother Earth's not in danger. Don't have that big an ego. We can't destroy the earth, but we have to worry about us a little bit. It's people who are in danger." And she said, "You know, we people on the earth, we're just like so many fleas. And if we get to be too much of a nuisance, she'll just shake us all off. And so what? So what if we go? The dinosaurs went, but their spirits are still here. We all feel it. That's why we love dinosaurs so much. That's why our kids love dinosaurs. We still have part of a dinosaur brain back here at the bottom of our brain. Their spirit's still here. If we get shaken off as human beings, our spirits will still be here anyway. So no big whoopee." She used the Quechua word for whoopee. No big whoopee. She said, "So what? People go, but," she said, "what the fun part is that Mother Earth, Pachamama, is twitching. She's sending us a warning." And the shaman lady pointed up at the glacier on top of the mountain nearby, Cayambe Mountain, right on the equator. Huge glacier, but it's melting. She said, "We've been watching that glacier melt. Pachamama is sending us a message. She's twitching a little bit. She isn't shaking us off yet, but she's twitching. So the good news is, let's listen. What a wonderful time to be alive, when the earth is speaking to us so strongly and we have the opportunity to do something about it." And this takes us to the prophecies I want to talk about a little bit. So there's so many prophecies on every indigenous culture that I know of. All over this planet has prophecies that this is a time for the potential for tremendous transformation. And probably many of you are aware of the 2012 prophecy, the Mayan prophecy. I've been working with Mayan shamans since the 70s, and as I said, I'm taking a group down to do sacred ceremony in many of the sacred sites, Tikal and others, in December. I'd love to have some of you join. Many people think, including Hollywood apparently, that the Mayan prophecy of 2012 is a doomsday prophecy. It's anything but that. It comes out of the Popol Vuh, the Mayan sacred text. And in the Popol Vuh, they talk about a time when there was a king named Seven Macaw. And he was characterized by greed, deep materialism, exploitation, brutality. But he was killed by the hero twins, boy and a girl. They lopped off his head and replaced him with Hunahpu. And Hunahpu is a king who's characterized by love, compassion, cooperation, spirituality. And so the Mayan shamans today, the teachers today, tell us that this is a metaphor, that it's time to end the old period represented by Seven Macaw of greed, materialism, brutality, exploitation, and replace it with this new period of cooperation, love, compassion, spirituality. And it must be we the people, boy and girl, the hero twins, men and women, that do this. The leaders won't do it. They can't do it. They're too ingrained in the system. They're owned by the system. We have to do it. And the reason that December 21st, 2012 is so important is that roughly 2,000 years ago, the astrologers predicted, the Mayan astrologers predicted that on that date, the sun will enter the great rift of the Milky Way. From the perspective of the Mayan communities, you'll see the sun in the center of the Milky Way, and that represents the head of Seven Macaw being severed in that center of the Milky Way, the sun is the head being severed. And that gives us the opportunity to move into the new period of Hunapu. But you have to do it. I have to do it. We have to do it together. We the people, boy and girl. And they particularly emphasize that this has to be balanced between men and women. But they also say that because there's been such a strong balance in so many parts of the world in favor of the male, that the female really has to rise now. This is a time when it's so important that you women take more and more control, because we men probably won't give it to you. I'll give it to you. But you gotta take it. And we men have to learn to bring out our feminine side a lot more too, because if we go through a period of serious and severe change, but we use the old male hierarchy system to do it, we're just gonna end up back here again, aren't we? You know, we've got to bring up that nurturing receptivity of the feminine. My Schwa friends in the Amazon say, women build such beautiful, delicate, wonderful, comfortable nests. Men steal nests from other men. It's a little dramatic, but it's somewhat true. So we've got to bring that back up, and these prophecies make this clear. Another prophecy I'd like to share with you is the prophecy of the eagle and the condor. How many of you know of Pachamama Alliance here? Oh, great. Well, the rest of you need to. Look up Pachamama.org and go to one of our Awakening the Dreamer programs. There's many in New York. We're in about 65 countries now. It's a great organization. But we tell the story of the eagle and the condor, which comes out. It's an ancient prophecy, probably around 3,000 years old, 1,000 years before Christ. People of the Amazon and the Andes brought this prophecy out. And the prophecy runs like this. It says, back in the mists of history, this was told 3,000 years ago. They're going back a long time. Back in the mists of history, human societies decided to take two different courses. One was the course of the eagle, they said, which is the course, they defined it as the course of the mind, the brain, the thought processes, the rational, the scientific, the industrial. You could even say maybe the male. And the other was the path of the condor, the path of the heart, of intuition, of art, of emotion, of feelings. Perhaps we could say the feminine approach. It doesn't say either one is better or worse, they're just different. And for the first three Pachacutis, and a Pachacuti in Quechua is a 500-year interval, up through the third Pachacuti, they would go their separate ways and not really connect. But in the fourth Pachacuti, which according to the prophecies began in about 1500, they would come together and they would clash. And the eagle would be so strong that it would practically drive the condor into extinction, but not quite. And of course we know this is what happened. Columbus, 1492. After that, the scientific industrial cultures of the world practically drove the indigenous cultures into extinction, but not quite. And the prophecy goes on to say in the fifth Pachacuti, 500 years later, roughly the year 2000, the two would have the opportunity, the eagle and the condor, to rise together into one sky, to dance, to mate, and to create a new offspring, which would be a higher form of consciousness, bringing mind and heart together, the scientific and the intuitive, the male and the female, bringing them together to dance in one sky and to create a new higher level of consciousness. That's what we're in right now. And we know that's been happening. In the 1990s, suddenly we here in the north, in the eagle countries, began to be really interested in what the people of the south, what the people of the condor countries had to say, the new age, the interest in shamanism. Before I ever wrote Confessions of an Economic Hitman, I wrote 5 books on shamanism, which are for sale over here at the Inner Traditions bookstall, and the Confessions one are over here in this bookstall where I'll be signing books, but they're all here. And we know that in the 1990s, people began to get interested in these things. People were buying those books. And the shamans and the indigenous people around the world were opening themselves up to teaching. Before they'd kept silent, quiet. And we're seeing this a lot more now, of course, today. So we're seeing the prophecies being realized. This fifth Pachacuti, this time of coming together. But once again, the prophecies do not say it will happen, only that the potential is here. You have to make it happen. We have to make it happen. And of course we know we're just entering the age of Aquarius. June of this year is the beginning of the age of Aquarius. We felt it coming back in the 60s. We were awakening to it, but now it's coming. Shambhala, and there's so many prophecies. I'm just going to share one more with you. That is the prophecy of the Himalayas, the prophecy of the Buddhists. And that prophecy says that the 14th Dalai Lama is the last. So this one we've got now is the 14th. What does that mean? Well, I had the interesting good fortune a few years ago to be leading a group of people, about 30 people, into Ladakh, protectorate, formerly Tibet, part of Tibet, but now a protectorate of India, northern India, not part of the Chinese system. And on the morning we were all flying out, we're in the airport very early, waiting for our plane. And the Dalai Lama comes in. He's been speaking in Ladakh with his entourage. And under his arm, he's carrying my book, Shapeshifting. There's a story behind that, but I won't get into it right now. But anyway, he's got my book, and to make a long story short, he invites me to sit next to him in the front seat of the plane, 737, flying for an hour from Leh, Ladakh to Jammu, India. So while we're sitting there together, I say to him, "Hey, Your Holiness," you can be pretty casual with the Dalai Lama. "So you're the 14th. You're the last. What do you think of that?" And he said, "Well, you know, I'm not sure, but I think maybe I'm the last from the Himalayas. And I think maybe I'm the last Buddhist Dalai Lama." Well, that blew my mind. And I said, "Well, where do you think the next one might be from?" And he said, "Well, that's why I'm reading your book." Because I think he may, or she, may be from the Amazon or the Andes. And I'm like, well, that doesn't make any sense. They don't know none of the indigenous people know anything about Buddhism there. But anyway, I didn't think much more about it. I didn't say anything more. Plane lands. He invites, as a result of this, he invites my group of 30 people and me to come to his house 2 days later in Dharamsala, India, and spend the afternoon chatting with him in his living room, which we did. And it was interesting because we're sitting there waiting for him. He comes into the room, this living room where we're all sitting, and he says, he welcomes us, and then he says, "I just want to make one thing perfectly clear. Don't become a Buddhist. The world doesn't need any more Buddhists. But do practice the Buddhist principles of compassion and cooperation." And then I got it, like, he's saying, and I later learned that the Dalai Lama is not all that happy with all the male hierarchy in the Buddhist tradition and all that, you know, all of that rigmarole. And what he was saying, I thought, was that, you know, it could be somebody from the Amazon or Andes who doesn't know a darn thing about the Dakinis and the gods and goddesses and all that stuff, just knows about compassion and cooperation and this new Pachacuti, 2012, what we're moving into. He got it. That's where we're headed. So that was another prophecy. And I did have a funny thought, though, as he was doing that. I thought, you know, what if we were all sitting, what if you were in St. Peter's Square on Easter Sunday? Millions of people out here and lots more watching on television. And the Pope comes out on his balcony and he looks out at the masses and he says, "I just want to make one thing perfectly clear. Don't become a Catholic." That would change the world. I get you warmed up a little bit here, so I'm going to share another little, kind of a funny story of the Dalai Lama. You know, at the end, you exchange these white scarves. Everybody goes up and puts a white scarf on him, and he takes it off and puts it on you. And so, you know, like 30 people, and I'm standing next to him, introducing him to the people. It's my group. And he says people can ask him questions. So this one woman comes up, and they do the exchange, and she says, "Your Holiness, is it true that you're celibate?" And he pauses for a moment, he gives her this really interesting look, and he says, "Yes, I've chosen to be celibate. In my lineage, I don't have to be, but I've chosen to be." And then he gives her this really what I would call a flirtatious look. And he says, but you know, in my next life, I don't think I will be. So here we are in this time of prophecies. And you're it. Indigenous people tell us that each of us, that you were born into this particular body, into the gender you were born into, the parents you were born in at this particular time, at any time, because you come with a mission. And you were born into this time of the prophecies, this time of tremendous transformation, potential for transformation, because you have a mission. And the fact that you're sitting here today indicates to me that you understand that on some level. You've got a mission, and it's part of this process of transformation. It's part of moving into this new Pachacuti. We're experiencing this all over the world today. In the last 2 weeks, I've been speaking all over California and up and down the East Coast, and to all kinds of groups, Muslim groups, business groups, all kinds of groups. Just before that, I was at Istanbul speaking to 4,000 CEOs of big communications companies. And everywhere I go, I hear people getting it, including the CEOs. They're not necessarily acting on it, but they're getting it. They're understanding that we are in a new time. And we must remember that today it's the big corporations that are calling the shots. And you have the power over the corporations. The marketplace is a democracy, if you choose to make it such. Every time you buy something or decide not to, you're casting a ballot. And I think that ballot may be more important than the one you cast every 2 years or 4 years, because that's a ballot you cast every week or every day, frequently. So it's a very, very powerful and important ballot. And it's really important for us to understand that we have the power. You have the power. And I wanted to talk just a little bit about what is the meaning of this word enlightenment, because I think that's what the prophecies are really about, and that's what this power is about. How do we look at enlightenment? What is enlightenment? And I think when you really start to look at this, you can see that, you know, we're at a time which we might be called a shadow time, when we're really dealing with false values, false hopes, false loves, things that aren't really making this world a better place for my grandson, which means for every child of every sentient being on this planet, not just human, but all sentient beings. We're cast in this shadow of falseness, false love, false values, false ideas. And we're waking up to that. And so, how do you get rid of a shadow? You cast light on it. I'm really reminded of the story, the allegory that Socrates told of the cave. And Socrates told this story. He said, imagine there's a group of people who from the time they're very, very young, they've been chained to the back of a cave. And they've been chained in such a way that they're sitting and they can only see the back wall of the cave. Behind them there's a huge bonfire. And people are walking back and forth in front of that bonfire. But all these people chained here can see on that back wall are the shadows of the people walking back and forth. Just the shadows. And then one woman gets up. She understands she can get out of the chains. She gets out of the chains, she gets up, and she walks back toward the bonfire. She looks at it, she's terribly confused. What is that back there? Her reality is the shadows, not this other reality. And she's very confused. What's going on? So she walks back toward that fire. And as she walks toward the fire and turns back and looks at the shadow, she sees her own shadows growing larger and larger and larger. But then as she gets to the fire and walks around it, her shadow on the wall vanishes. She's shed light on her own shadow, and she's now understanding the reality. She's part of these people. She's reached into a new reality. She's accepted the reality, not the shadow. And I'm also struck by, if you're standing someplace near the horizon over here at the east, the sun is rising. As the sun rises, is casting a pretty large shadow, but the further it rises, the less the shadow, and when it's right overhead, there's no shadow. And so this is a time when we need to move closer and closer into the light of true understanding. And as we move into that light, the shadow goes. The shadow of false values, false loves, false ideas, false concepts that we've all been dealing with, really the ones of seven macaw, that tell us that it's a world of exploitation, of brutality, of materialism. And as we expose that shadow, we become enlightened. We walk into the light. The light exposes us, it surrounds us, and we begin to see the reality of this world around us. And the reality is, as the Age of Aquarius says, the reality is that we can move out of a time when we are ruled by concepts of lack, of limitation, and when we have developed old and even unconscious dysfunctional patterns, the stories that we tell each other about lack, about the need to grab more because it just isn't enough out there. There is enough. We just need to understand that and move beyond these old stories of lack and limitation. We know that there's enough energy on this planet for all of us. Not enough oil, thank God. Let's get rid of all the oil. Who needs the oil? People worry about peak oil. Are we going to run out of oil? Well, I sure hope so. Soon. Because there's plenty of energy from the sun. That's where it all comes from anyway. There's an abundance. And there's abundance of love on this planet. I hang out in the forest where I live in the state of Washington with my 4-year-old grandson. He lives just down the street from me. And as we walk through the forest, he feels the love of those trees. I feel the love of those trees. He has no inhibitions about it whatsoever. I used to develop inhibitions, and now I'm getting rid of them. He's helping me. We need to move into this new light. Get rid of that old shadow that says we're lacking, we're insufficient, you're not good enough, you can't do it. You're bought into the old stories of dysfunctional behavior and dysfunctional patterns. It's time to release all that. It's time to understand that you have the power. You have the power to truly love unconditionally. You have the power to take this world back from the robber barons who've stolen it from us. Because our world has been stolen by the seven macaws, the greedy, brutal, exploitative leaders. And it's time for us to take it back. Are you ready to take it back? Yeah. That was pretty weak. Are you ready to take it back? Yeah. All right, that's a lot better.